Let's talk about Proposition HHH. So Proposition HHH was a housing proposition here in Southern California in Los Angeles County back in 2016. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Southern California, or if it's different in your municipality, every 2 years when we go to vote for either congressmen, or 4 years when there's presidents and or senators and or congressmen, there's always this slew of propositions on the ballots, especially in here in LA. There's usually between about 12 and 30 of them to vote on, usually some type of tax, right? It's almost always some type of tax. It's either some type of excess tax or some type of bond measure that they're trying to pass, or some type of new property tax or some type of new school bond or whatever. And for most of my life, an overwhelming majority of those have passed, because the way they're worded, it's like, the dying cats and troubled children of inner city schools, Proposition 136 or whatever. And then you read it, and it's like, well, how can I not support like dying, tortured cats and struggling kids in inner city schools? And then, of course, if you read the bill, it very rarely has exactly to do with the title of the bill that you would think. So anyway, 2016, this Proposition HHH comes up, and it's like, well, for $1.2 billion, which, by the way, the city did not have, we are going to pass Proposition HHH, and we're going to build 10,000 houses. Now, for any of you that don't live in California, houses here are really fucking expensive. Local city ordinance makes building properties nearly impossible at all, and it makes it 100% possible to build low to moderate income housing. So for example, I know a really good developer in the area who does these small lot subdivisions. So he'll buy 3 or 4 or 5 properties, he'll level them. In that place, he'll make these 3-story vertical condos so you can fit about 12 to 20 condos on what used to have 3 houses. It makes for denser housing, but it also creates more housing, which we desperately need here in California. The problem is, over the last 5 years, just to turn a small profit, the guy's not getting rich. He's constantly have projects going. This isn't like big FU money. He sells out one 20-unit project and he's retiring to the Cayman Islands. It's like, just to make a profit of 10 to 20%, he's had to move his starting price per unit from $800,000 a unit to $1.2 million a unit, just in the last 5 years, because of construction costs, because of land costs, because of the fact that it takes 5 years to go through the permitting process here in LA, and you got to dig water wells, and you got to do this. I just got to tell you this side story. So this is hilarious. This is how stupid building codes are in California. So he's building these units where, of course, the LA Times wrote him up for like this evil developer that's not willing to build any low to moderate income housing units. And all of these units he's building are starting at $980,000 or something. So the units he's building is on a cul-de-sac. The units end at the end of his street. And on the other side of that cul-de-sac, which is down an embankment, is like a main Los Angeles thoroughfare. It's called Glendale Boulevard. It connects Glendale to the 5 freeway. It's like a major thoroughfare from, one of the little suburbs of Los Angeles, or little communities within Los Angeles, right to the 5 freeway. That street will never go away. Like, unless we get bombed, that street's never going away. So he's building his units, and the city inspector comes out and he's like, well, it's city code that if you're building a new unit, you've got to run the plumbing, the piping, the copper, the wire, the electrical, the sewage. You've got to run it. And I don't know exactly what the code was. We'll say 20 feet. You got to run it 20 feet past your property for, future developments. So he looks out and he looks at the city code guy, and he looks out and he's like, sir, that's Glendale Boulevard. We're at the end of the cul-de-sac where there will never ever be a house on the other side. What are we running plumbing and piping and sewage and sidewalks to? And the guy's like, well, I don't care. That's the building code. And he's like, yeah, but I'm literally building a bridge and a tunnel and sewage to nowhere, because nobody will ever build there. And that's going to cost me like $50,000 of extra development costs. And they're like, well, sorry, that's building code. Get it done, or we're ceasing construction. So simultaneously, the city's just bending him over. And he's having to add $50,000 to his build costs, which guess what? He's not going to make $50,000 less money. So that's got to get passed on to the end consumer who ends up buying the house. And then, of course, the LA Times come out and does a hit piece on him on how he's like this evil, rich, greedy developer just, rubbing his gold coins at night because he can't make houses on the cheap. So I tell you that story because of this. The city of Los Angeles said that they were going to build 10,000 houses for $1.2 billion. So let's just take $1.2 billion and divide that by 10,000 houses. The city of Los Angeles, when they passed Proposition HH, claimed that they were going to build houses in Los Angeles County for $120,000 each. Now, even going back to 2016, when lumber wasn't 3 times as expensive as it is now, you can't even buy the building materials for a house in Los Angeles for $120,000. So, okay, you dig into the bill a little bit more, and it's like, well, even though this is what politicians are saying, that they're going to build 10,000 houses for the homeless, that's not really how it's going to work. We're going to subsidize a few thousand, and we're going to convert a few thousand, and yes, we're going to build a few thousand more, but we'll get to 10,000 units for homeless people for $1.2 billion. Okay, well, maybe you're the city. Maybe you can bypass all those building codes. Maybe you have some economies of scale. Maybe you're going to actually do the right thing and get a bunch of different contractors to bid against each other and like drive down the cost. Of course, none of that happened. Maybe you've already vetted the sites where you're going to have some of these homeless shelters built, or these homeless units built, or these homeless apartments, or these homeless condos. None of that was done. None of the pre-work was done, right? So, of course, what do? It passes, because California's passed anything that sounds like it's going to help. Anything on the progressive agenda gets passed here. So they pass the bill, and then they start scouting out sites for where they're going to build this. Well, guess what? The 65% of Los Angelinos who passed the bill, then when all of a sudden there's a suitable site to build for cheap, everybody in Southern California started saying, well, no, don't build it in my community. They tried to build one in Koreatown. The Koreatown City Council banded together, stopped the construction. They tried to build one in North Hollywood. They tried to build, can't build one in Beverly Hills, of course. But everywhere they tried to build one, people said, no. I want to help the homeless people, but I don't want them in my community. I don't want homeless people living in an apartment next to me and driving down my property value and shopping at my Trader Joe's and going into my liquor store or my Whole Foods. No. Put them in somebody else's community. So then they would go try to put them in another community and just an absolute shit show where now cities start suing each other because there's all these different municipalities within LA City and LA County. So now this $1.2 billion, a bunch of it is going to lawsuits on how they're going to find a suitable location to actually build the property, right? Because who would do any pre-work before you authorize $1.2 billion of funding? Oh, I digress, because it gets worse. So then if you read the actual bill, which I did when it came out and I voted against, and I try to get all my realtor friends and I try to get all my friends that are libertarians, conservatives, give a shit about where our tax money is going. I tried to get them to vote against this, but it feels really good. It feels really good. We're gonna get 10,000 homes out there for the homeless. I'm like, guys, this is a total boondoggle. Like, they don't know how they're going to fund the ongoing maintenance. They don't know how they're going to fund the ongoing social services that they said was going to come with each unit, right? Because you just can't put somebody who's a drug addict or has psychosis or has major mental problems. You can't just put them in an apartment and be like, oh, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. No, you've got to get mental health services, and they've got to have some food, and they've got to have some type of job program. Of course, we passed this bill to house 10,000 homeless people with no clue how we're actually going to take care of the 10,000 homeless people that we now put in homes, right? Because the answer isn't just everybody who's homeless needs a home. The answer is people are homeless because they're choosing to be homeless, or they have drug and alcohol problems, or they have psychosis problems, or they have PTSD problems, or they have disability problems. Like, it's just not about the housing, right? So I read the bill, and one, there was no ongoing funding for this stuff, which they called, what did they call it? They called it assistant housing, something to that effect. I'll look this up. Oh, there's another Cosmo model. Oh, by the way, I didn't care about this Cosmo model because this isn't saying that she's healthy. It's just saying she's an influencer. Great. She's awesome. She's an influencer. I don't know who she is. Maybe she's a singer or whatever. I digress. Okay. So the high cost of housing here, Proposition HH. Okay. Here's what I wanted to see. Now, if we go to the bill said Proposition HH in November of 2006 passed by an overwhelming majority or margin, authorizing City Council to issue up to $1.2 billion in general obligation bonds. Here's the magic word, people: to partially subsidize the development of up to 10,000 supportive housing units. That's the word I was looking for, supportive housing. Now, partially is a really fucking dangerous word in government, right? Because at least if they would have said, we got $1.2 billion, whatever we can do with it, that's what we're going to do. Cost of construction goes up. Oh, well, we're going to build 8,000 units instead of 10,000. If we totally screwed this up, if we spend 5 years in lawsuits just trying to find a location, it is what it is, but we've authorized $1.2 billion to this project, and that's it. No, 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 my friends. No, no, no. Anytime the government says partially, you know the boondoggle is coming. So we're now 5 years later, and 5 years later, costs, total development costs, are currently at $4,086,000,000, $4,086,000. And I do not in any way, shape, or form believe this number, because I think there's all kinds of shenanigans and fuckery that's going on here. But they claim that about 5,700 units 5 years later are in operation, right? So now some of these development costs are, acquisition of land, and there's obviously a bunch of construction projects underway. So let's say they do get to their 10,000 number, right? They get to their 10,000 unit number, which they're not going to, right? They're not going to get to the 10,000 number because the first thing is they were never going to build 10,000 units. They were going to build somewhere between 4 and 5, and then they were going to subsidize others. Like if you read the fine print on one of these pages, it talks about how, well, a large portion of the money is going to subsidies for up to 10 years for houses that were converted. So they basically kind of like HUD housing, or kind of like Section 8 housing. They created a bond where they could house people for 10 years, but they don't own the underlying asset, right? That's either some type of other boondoggle that they're working out, or they're paying private homeowners to subsidize rent for the homeless, or whatever the case may be. So let's say they do end up with all 10,000 units, right? Which they're not going to, but let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they do. And let's say the city of LA owns all 10,000 of those units, which they won't, but let's just say they do. So we're currently at $4,086,000,000. They've got about a little over half of them built. 2/3 of them either currently underdeveloped or being constructed. So let's say they're 3/4. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say they're 5/6 of the way done with all the spending, which I don't believe that either. But let's just say they're going to end up somewhere around $5 billion in total funding out of the general fund, out of bonds they issued, out of all the stuff that they did. They're going to end up with about 10,000 units in some way, shape, or form for about $5 billion. And in about 10 years, 1/3 of those units are going to fall off because they were only subsidized on this 10-year program. So you'll end up with about 7,000 units for about $5 billion in costs. So let's just do the math. Let's take $5 billion, divide by 7,000 units. 5 billion, divide by 7,000. That comes out to a cost of $714,000 per unit. $714,000 per unit built, constructed, and presumably part of the housing stock for the homeless for the foreseeable future. Because again, those 3,000 or so are going to fall off. Those won't be in inventory anymore. Now we're going to have about 7,000 houses. By the way, guess what? Those 7,000 houses are going to have to be maintained and upkeep and utilities and all kinds of other ongoing funding. But just the hard cost of construction and acquisition are running us at $750,000 per house. Chris, can you look this up for me? In 2016, well, the bill was passed in 2016, so let's say they don't really roll it out to 2017. In 2017, can you look at what the median cost of a home was in LA County? So 2017, median house of a home, LA County. I'm going to guess it was about $380,000.
555.
555. Okay, I was wrong. So median price of a house in 2017, which is when this money basically came to fruition, the average house was $555,000. Okay, The government, if they exert their power, has collective bargaining agreement because they can do certain things that we cannot because we don't have $4 billion to go buy houses. So let's say 555. Let's say they went below the median price. They bought the city of LA said, you know what? We're not going to embark on this construction project. We don't really know how we're going to pay for the services anyways. So let's just buy one-off houses, condos. Yeah, we're going to have to go a little bit out to the outlier areas of Palmdale and West Covina and Riverside County and, you know, maybe South LA. But we can probably pick up with our collective bargaining agreement with a absolute crack team of realtors. We can probably pick up houses $100,000 to $200,000 below the median price, right? So maybe they could have got units in condo buildings or small single family residents all over the county for $300,000 to $400,000. Let's say $400,000 because the median price, of course, is pulling in all those high cost areas, West LA, Brentwood, Los Feliz, whatnot, because that's the median. So we could probably find a lot of housing in outlying areas for significantly lower than that. So let's say $300,000 to $400,000. So the county, instead of embarking on this boondoggle construction project where they didn't know how they were going to fund it, they didn't know where they were going to place them. You know, I just, the cynic in me believes there's all kinds of kickbacks with these contractors. And I bet you if I dug in deeper, somehow the contractors that won the bid are owned by the cousin of the guy that sits on the city council. Like, we know this shit happens. Let's not kid ourselves. But if they just went out and said, you know what, we're going to buy as many units as we can for $350,000. So they've got their $5 billion that they just wasted. And now they're going to buy houses for $350,000. They could have ended up with 14,000 houses across LA County. 14,000 houses across LA County. Now, I understand the libertarian in me hates this because then you start artificially inflating the prices of the housing supply because the government is kind of this buyer of last resort. I'm not a huge fan here, but I'm just saying, if we're going to talk about the lesser of two evils, they could have got twice as many houses 5 years ago. And guess what? They've got like 3,000 homeless people that have been housed now because of these programs. And we could have had 14,000 families housed 3 years ago. And get this, because the government is so slow and so inefficient. Chris, I want you to look this up now. So since 2017, what has the average property appreciation been in LA County since 2017? Maybe look at like annual property appreciation last 10 years and you can get a little graph or something there. I'm going to guess we're up like 10% a year since 2017, something like that. You know, it's probably going to go like up 8%, up 7%, up 4%, up 10%. So remember, we're going to end up with 7,000 properties that we don't know how to fund. We could have had 14,000 properties in place 4 years ago for homeless people to live in and actually start rehabilitating people and getting them back on track and maybe get a job before COVID hit. And I'm going to take a wild guess and say 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. We've seen like 8 to 9% appreciation throughout Los Angeles County. So your average house that LA would have bought for $350, $400 is up maybe 40% in value. So instead of losing money and sinking money into this endless pit of construction and fighting cities and trying to find locations, you know, maybe their portfolio of 5 billion properties is now worth 6 or 7.
I mean, I have an article here that says home prices in Los Angeles are 66% more expensive than 5 years ago.
66%. Holy fuck. So that means if LA County would have just said, hey, we're taking our $4 or $5 billion, we're buying as many units as we can, and we're going to place as many homeless people as quickly as we can. First of all, we would have had tens of thousands of homeless people off the street 3 or 4 years earlier. They would have bought property that was already existing stock. Now, of course, we do have a housing crisis in California. So this does create kind of this cascading second and third level effects that probably I would also be complaining about today. So there's no perfect answer. But this portfolio of $4 billion or $5 billion worth of houses would be up 67% in value. Like, the government could have actually made money on a program for a change instead of just sinking endless dollars into a program. And, you know, there's some further reading here on LA Times. You know, they talked about, well, now that they can't build these houses fast enough, now they're trying to do these little 8x8 tiny house sheds. By the time they did the construction on these, A tiny house. Like I'm talking about like a Tough Shed, a Tough Shed you can buy at Home Depot for about 12 grand, pumping electricity into it and common plumbing. Like these don't have individual bathrooms. You have to go to communal bathrooms. I drove by one of them actually because I wanted to see what they were like. So they're basically Tough Sheds. They're insulated Tough Sheds with some electricity. So maybe they're double the cost of a Tough Shed. You can go buy a Tough Shed right now. I can go buy a Tough Shed right now at Home Depot for about $12,000 to $15,000. Put it in the back. I can run an electrical line out there, put a split unit air conditioning unit. That'll cost me about $3,000. Probably get a good plumber in here to run like, some water, like drinking water, and tell Chris he's got to come in to use our bathroom. We're using communal bathroom. I could probably build one of these for like 20 grand in my backyard. But somehow the city of LA is finding a way to spend $130,000 per unit. And they've got economy of scale because they're putting 50, 60, 70 of them on like one lot. It's just absolutely insane, right? And then LAist and another LA Times article talks about how a bunch of the units that they're building that aren't going to be ready for another year or two, and they're going to end up being significantly more expensive than even this article, which was back in September of last year. Lumber prices have almost doubled and in some cases tripled since September of last year. So, these articles 6 months ago that were saying, oh, these houses that aren't going to be complete for a couple more years that are running 500,000. There was another one in here. The project over in one of the projects is now up to 750,000 per unit, and they're not done. So that's really going to be 800,000 or 900,000 by the time they get building supplies in. This is just a complete clusterfuck, right? And this is just proof that like good intentions and well-meaning policy does not mean that you have positive outcomes, right? I get it. I drive by people, I walk by people. I don't want people to be homeless, right? I don't want people to be destitute. But that doesn't mean that to feel good about yourself, you have to vote for these horrific policies that are never enacted the way they say they are. They always cost significantly more than advertised, and they never do as much good as we think they are, right? And then what's going to end up happening when they get to the end of spending this $4 or $5 billion in construction, they're going to find out that they don't have any money left over for maintenance or for mental health or for food, drug, utilities. And I guarantee you by 2022, there's going to be another proposition on the ballot saying, hey, we failed and we really need to take care of these homeless people. So let's do another bond measure for $1 billion, right? And last thought on this. It would be bad enough if this was just money we were spending out of the county treasury that we already had, but we're not. We're issuing bonds, and I think I closed that tab actually. We're issuing bonds, and this is how a bond works. A bond works like this. County of Los Angeles wants to spend $1.2 billion on a housing initiative, okay? So they go to Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or whatever. They say, hey, we want $1.2 billion worth of bonds. They say, okay, great. Or we want $1.2 million worth of money. We have authorized $1.2 million worth of money. And they say, okay, well, we're going to take our underwriting fee and our this fee and our that fee, and we're going to end up peeling off 3 to 5% off the top. And then if you want to sell these bonds to investors and pension funds and very wealthy people who are comfortable making their 2 or 3% a year, you're going to have to pay 2 or 3% a year, or 4% or 5% or 1% or whatever they pay in interest. So that $1.2 billion, we didn't have that money here in the county of Los Angeles. We're mortgaging our future. We're paying some investment bank some fee to underwrite this and take this to the public. And then we're paying interest payments. So what really happens, and I don't have the math in front of me, I didn't feel like doing this much research, but that $1.2 billion that we said was going to go to homelessness, we issued, what we actually approved was the right to issue bonds to raise the $1.2 billion. So there's probably like some 10% slippage in there, right? So of that $1.2 billion, somewhere in there, by the time you pay the fees and the underwriting fees and the interest over 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or however long they can sell these bonds for, they're probably 10-year bonds. We end up losing about 10%, right? It's like a tax off the top on the tax that we're raising to issue bonds. So now we've got probably a 10-year horizon where we're paying back this $1.2 billion, and we didn't even get the $1.2 billion. We probably got somewhere south of $1.1 billion because we had to pay $100 million in interest and underwriting fees and banker fees and kickback fees and all this other shit. And for Christ's sakes, man, it just never works out. Can you guys read these fucking propositions before you vote for them? I'm going to have a stroke.